The bell over the general store's door gave a tired little jingle as the wind pushed it open. Elias Carter barely looked up from the counter. His hands, broad, calloused, and cracked from years of ranch work, were busy stacking a small pile of coins. He'd been counting and recounting them for the past 5 minutes, each time with a little less patience. Outside, the late afternoon sun bled across the sky in streaks of orange and red, dust curling through the air like smoke from an invisible fire. It was the kind of evening when men kept their heads down and hurried home before the saloons filled up and the wrong kind of company came out. The air inside the store was still and smelled faintly of dry beans, kerosene, and horse sweat. Only the slow tick of the wall clock kept him company until a whisper cut through the quiet. "Can you buy this bread?" The voice was small, shaky, and yet it lodged itself in Elias's chest like a thorn. He lifted his gaze and froze, standing. Just inside the doorway was a little girl, no older than 9. Her hair was the pale, sun-faded brown of wheat left too long in the fields, tied back with a scrap of red ribbon that had lost most of its color. She wore a dress that had once been white, but was now the dusty gray of the town streets, patched at the elbows and hem. In her hands she clutched a small, rough loaf of bread, as if afraid it might vanish. But it wasn't her clothes that stopped Elias cold, it was her eyes. They were a deep, stormy blue, the exact shade of the eyes he had seen every morning in the mirror until the day his wife had died. The same eyes his daughter might have had if she had lived. Elias swallowed, his throat dry. "What's that you said?" Her fingers tightened around the loaf. I don't got enough for it, but if you could buy it, I can pay you." Back, it wasn't a beggar's voice. There was no pleading, no tears, just a stubborn, almost proud steadiness. That, more than anything, caught him off guard. He glanced toward the shopkeeper, old Mr. Porter, who was pretending not to listen while polishing a jar of candy sticks that hadn't sold in months. Elias could feel Porter's eyes flick toward them now and then, curiosity barely hidden. "What's your name?" Elias asked. The girl hesitated, shifting her weight. "Leela." "And where's your folks, Lila?" Her lips pressed together. "Mama's home. She's sick, and Papa's not here. Not here." That could mean anything out here dead. Gone, drunk in a ditch, or run off without looking back. Elias studied her for another long moment. The bread in her hands wasn't much won. Maybe 2 meals if stretched. She looked like she hadn't had one in days. "How much?" he asked Porter, jerking his chin toward the loaf. Porter sighed, named a price that was a hair too high, and high. Elias didn't argue. He slid a coin across the counter, but when he handed the bread back, Lila didn't just take it. She dug into her coat pocket and pulled out a single worn brass button. It had a tiny engraving of a flower on it, tarnished from years of handling. "For trade," she said, her voice almost defiant. "Fair's fair." Elias stared at the button. Something in him, something rusty and long unused, shifted. He took it, turning it over in his palm. "All right," he said. "Fair's fair." They stepped out into the street together. The sun now sinking low enough that shadows stretched long and thin across the packed dirt. A few men loitered near the saloon, their laughter too loud, the smell of cheap whiskey drifting even this far. "Where do you live?" Elias asked. "Out past the old tannery," she said, pointing. "It's not far." Not far turned out to be a stretch of road where the buildings leaned into each other like trunks, and the air smelled of rotting wood and stale beer. The tannery was a hulking, abandoned shell, its windows gaping like missing teeth. Beyond it, a handful of shacks huddled against the edge of the Badlands. Lila's home was barely more than 4 walls and a roof. made of warped planks. She pushed. The door opened, and Elias followed her in. The air inside was damp and cold. A single cot sat in the corner, and on it lay a woman, Lila's mother. He guessed thin as a fence rail and pale enough to blend into the sheets. Her breathing was shallow, her lips dry and cracked. Lila set the bread down beside her, brushing the woman's hair back gently. "Mama, I brought food." The woman didn't stir. Elias frowned. "When's the last time she ate?" "Yesterday, maybe." "Doctor?" She shook her head. "We can't pay." He was about to ask more when something outside caught his attention. A shadow shifting just beyond the doorway. Years of living alone in the Wild West had honed his instincts, and every one of them screamed trouble. Slowly, Elias stepped to the door and looked out. A man stood a few yards away, leaning casually against a post. His coat was black, his hat pulled low, and even from here, Elias could see the smirk on his face. His right hand rested dangerously close to the butt of his revolver. "Well now," the man drawled, pushing off the post and sauntering closer. "Didn't figure I'd find you here, rancher." Elias kept his voice flat. "Don't reckon we've met." The man's grin widened. "Name's Wade Crowley, and you're standing in the middle of what's mine." Elias glanced back at Lila, who had gone still as a rabbit in tall grass. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, her shoulders tight. Crowley's gaze flicked toward the shack. "That woman in there? And the girl? They owe me, and I collect what's mine." There was no mistaking the meaning in his tone. It wasn't about money alone. Elias stepped out fully onto the porch, closing the door behind him. "You want something, you take it up with me." Crowley's smirk thinned. "Careful, Carter. Folks who get in my way tend to disappear." The two men stood there, the dying sunlight catching on the metal of their revolvers. For a moment, the street went silent, just the whisper of wind over dry earth. Elias didn't draw. Not yet, but his voice was iron when he said, "Then I reckon you'll have to try me." Crowley's smile returned, slow and mean. He tipped his hat, eyes never leaving Elias. "Sundown tomorrow, rancher. You and me will see who's still standing." He turned and walked away, his boots kicking up little puffs of dust with each step. Elias stood there a long moment after he was gone, the weight of what had just been set in motion pressing down on him like a storm about to break. Behind him, Lila's small voice broke the quiet. "Is he gonna hurt us?" Elias didn't answer right away. He just looked out at the horizon, where the sun was sinking into the jagged teeth of the Badlands, and thought of a promise he'd once made to a woman he'd loved and lost. Finally, he said, "Not if I can help it." And in that moment, though he didn't know it yet, Elias Carter's life had just changed forever. The night was restless. Wind rattled the shack's loose boards, sending little puffs of dust through the gaps. Elias sat in the single rickety chair by the door, his Winchester leaning against the wall within arm's reach. Lila had fallen asleep, curled up on a threadbare blanket beside her mother, who barely stirred except to cough every so often a wet, rattling sound that made Elias's jaw tighten. He hadn't planned on staying, but walking out after Wade Crowley's little performance felt like leaving a rabbit in the path of a wolf. And Elias Carter had done enough leaving in his life. By morning, the air was dry and brittle, the sky a hard, pale blue. Elias stepped outside to find Wade Crowley standing in the road again, as if he'd been there all night. "Morning, Carter," Wade said, tipping his hat with mock politeness. "Come to settle our business?" Elias crossed his arms. "You got no business here, Crowley." "That so? 'Cause far as I know, debts don't just vanish. Layla's mama owes me for rent, for food, for protection." His grin was snake slick. "And I always collect." "You mean extort," Elias said flatly. Wade's eyes darkened. Careful how you talk to me. Men who don't show respect tend to disappear. Something in Elias's stare must have told Wade he wasn't dealing with a man who spooked easy, because Crowley's grin came back, thinner this time. Fine, Wade said, stepping back. Enjoy your little charity case while you can, Carter. Tomorrow night, I come back, and I bring friends. He turned, his spurs jangling, and walked away without looking back. Elias spent the afternoon fixing what he could around the shack, patching holes with scrap wood, checking the hinges on the door. Every movement felt like a message to himself. You're staying. You're not walking away. Inside, Lila's mother Anna was awake, though weak. She thanked him in a voice that was little more than a whisper. You shouldn't be here, she rasped. Wade's dangerous. I've met dangerous men, Elias said, setting down a tin cup of water. They bleed like the rest. Anna shook her head faintly. He's got the sheriff in his pocket, and half the town's afraid of him. Elias didn't answer. Instead, he turned to Lila, who was trying to help her mother sit up. Stay close. To her, I'll be back before dark. He walked into town, boots kicking up dust, and headed for the general store. Inside, Mr. Porter eyed him nervously. Crowley's been in here twice today, Porter muttered while pretending to sort canned peaches. He's got that look in his eye, same one, before he put a man in the ground last spring. Elias kept, his voice calm. Then I reckon I'll be ready. That evening, Elias sat with Lila outside while the sky burned pink and gold. She tore small pieces of bread, feeding them to a scrawny chicken pecking near the porch. Why are you helping us? She asked suddenly. Elias didn't look at her right away. His eyes were on the horizon, where the light was fading into purple shadow. A long time ago, I told someone I wouldn't let another child go hungry if I could help it. Who? My wife, he said, the word tasting strange after years of silence. She died a long time ago, and so did our baby girl. Lila was quiet for a while. Then softly, I'm sorry. Elias gave a small nod, as if accepting her sympathy, but unwilling to linger in it. You should get inside. Night's comin'. It was past midnight when Elias woke to the creak of footsteps outside. His hand found the Winchester before his. Eyes were even open. The door splintered inward with a loud crack, and two men shoved their way, in one tall and lean with a scar over his lip, the other heavyset with a shotgun. Wade's voice drifted in from outside. Make it quick, boys. The scarred man lunged toward Lila's mother, grabbing for her arm. Lila screamed. Elias moved faster than the man could blink, ramming the butt of his rifle into his jaw. The man went down hard, teeth clattering on the floorboards. The heavyset one swung the shotgun toward Elias. A blast roared, wood shattering near the window. Elias dropped low, rolled, and drove his shoulder into the man's gut. They crashed into the table, sending tin cups flying. The fight was short and brutal, just the way Elias liked it. Scarface staggered up again, swinging wildly, but Elias caught him with a punch that left him sprawled against the wall. You tell Wade, Elias growled, shoving the heavyset man toward the door. Next time he sends men after a sick woman and a child, he better be ready to bury him. The two stumbled out into the night, muttering curses. Wade's laughter carried back through the dark. Enjoy your little victory, rancher. By sundown tomorrow, you're done. Elias shut the door, slid the bolt, and leaned the Winchester against the wall. His knuckles ached, his ribs throbbed. From where the heavyset man had landed a punch, but it wasn't the pain that weighed on him. It was the knowledge that Wade wasn't bluffing. Tomorrow, the real fight would come. He glanced over at Lila, who stood barefoot on the worn floorboards, clutching the loaf of bread to her chest, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. You all right? he asked Dot. She nodded once. But her eyes stayed on the door. Elias took a slow breath, the air tasting of dust and old fear. Get some sleep, kid. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. The morning after Wade's warning broke bright and cold, with a sky so sharp it felt like it could cut. Elias Carter rode slow through the town's main street. Lila perched in front of him on the saddle, her little hands gripping the horn. Behind them, tied to the saddle, was a battered canvas bag stuffed with bread, beans, a sack of flour, and a small jar of coffee. They didn't go back to the shack. Elias headed straight for his ranch. The Carter Ranch lay 10 miles out, tucked between a ridge of sandstone and a shallow river. Most days it was a lonely place, quiet except for the lowing of cattle and the creak of wind through the barn. Today, the quiet felt watchful. Lila's eyes darted everywhere across the open grassland, toward the tree line back over her shoulder. "You think they followed us?" she asked. "Not yet," Elias said. "But they will." He kept his voice calm, steady. A frightened child was one thing, panic was another. And if Wade Crowley came with half the men he could muster, there'd be no room for either. By noon, they were at the ranch. Elias slid from the saddle, lifted Lila down, and set her on her feet. "You know how to feed chickens?" he asked. She nodded quickly, almost proud. "Mama used to keep 3. "Good. That'll keep you busy while I work." He went to the barn first, checking the rifle's 2 Winchesters, an old Henry, and his revolver. Ammunition was decent, but not endless. He counted every cartridge, stacked them in neat rows on the workbench. Next came the houseboards over the back windows, heavy bar across the front door, the kind of makeshift barricades he hadn't built since the days of cattle rustlers roaming. In packs. Out back, Lila scattered grain for the hens, her braid swinging as she moved. She paused once to watch him work, then smiled faintly. "You look too serious for a man with a hat that big." Elias almost smiled back. Almost. "Hat's just the right size. You're just too small to appreciate it." She laughed a quick, bright sound in the cold air. Late that afternoon, Elias rode back to town to fetch Anna. She was weak, leaning heavy against him in the saddle, but the air at the ranch seemed to ease her breathing. Layla fussed over her immediately, setting her up in Elias's bed, tucking the blankets around her thin shoulders. "You didn't have to do this," Anna said quietly when Lila had gone outside again. Elias shrugged. "Wasn't about need." "Was?" "About right." Anna looked at him for a long time, something unreadable in her pale eyes. "Crowley won't stop. I know." Night came early. The fire in the hearth threw warm light across the room, the scent of coffee mixing with wood smoke. Lila sat cross-legged on the floor, chin in her hands, watching the flames. "You ever been scared?" she asked suddenly. "More times than I can count," Elias said. "What did you do?" "Kept moving. Kept breathing. Sometimes that's all you can do." She thought about that. "Were you scared when your wife died?" The question landed like a punch, but Elias didn't flinch. "I was scared before. The day she told me she was with child. Not because I didn't want the baby, but because I knew the world we live in. Hard places take good people. And sometimes, no matter what, you can't hold on to him." Lila's gaze dropped to the floor. "I don't remember my papa much, just that he was gone a lot. Mama says he loved me, but I don't think he wanted me." Elias reached over, placing a hand on her shoulder, rough, warm, steady. "Sometimes folks love you and just don't know how to show it. But that ain't your fault." It was near midnight when the dog started barking. Low at first, then sharp and frantic. Elias was on his feet instantly, grabbing the Winchester. "Stay with your mama," he told Lila, his voice hard enough to leave no room for argument. Out on the porch, the moonlight turned the grass silver. Shadows moved at the edge of the yard. 3 maybe 4 riders at first. Then more, the glint of rifle barrels, the quiet snort of horses. A voice carried across the open space, lazy and cold. "Carter, thought I told you your time was up." Wade Crowley stepped forward, flanked by 6 men. The moon caught the smirk on his face, but not the knife edge. In his eyes, Elias didn't answer. He just raised the rifle to his shoulder. The first shot cracked the night wide open. A man toppled from his horse, hitting the dirt with a thud. Then the gunfire began in earnest. The air filled with the sharp snap of bullets, the acrid tongue of gunpowder. Muzzle flashes lit the yard in brief, violent bursts. Elias moved between windows, firing in short, controlled bursts, his breathing slow and steady despite the chaos. Crowley's men fanned out, some crouching behind fence posts, others rushing for the barn. The sound of wood splintering echoed through the night as rounds slammed into the house. One bullet grazed Elias's shoulder hot, sharp pain blooming instantly. He gritted his teeth, shifted position. Inside, Lila ducked low beside her mother's bed, whispering prayers under her breath. A crash from the back 2 of Crowley's men had broken through the barn doors, making for the side of the house. Elias dropped one with a shot to the chest. The other vanished into the shadows. It happened fast. A heavy thud against the front door. Once. Twice. On the 3rd hit, the bar snapped, and the door flew inward. A man in a filthy coat stormed in, grabbing Lila before she could scramble away. She kicked and bit, but he clamped a hand over her mouth. "Got the girl," he shouted. Elias spun, fury tightening his grip on the rifle, but Crowley stepped into view behind the man, gun drawn, using Lila as a shield. "You shoot, Carter," Crowley called, and I put a hole in her head. The standoff held for a long, terrible moment, the only sound the ragged breathing of the girl and the creak of the floor under Crowley's boots. Then Crowley backed toward the door, dragging Lila with him. "Looks like you lose, rancher," he said, that smirk curling again. "Come find me if you think you can." They disappeared into the night, the thud of hooves fading fast. Elias stood frozen for half a breath, the emptiness of the doorway yawning before him. Then he was moving, grabbing his revolver, slinging the rifle over his shoulder, blood from his wound soaking into his shirt. Anna's voice called weakly from the bedroom. "Elias, I'll bring her back," he said, already stepping into the moonlight. The night smelled of dust and smoke, and the tracks in the dirt pointed toward the canyon. Elias Carter mounted up, the leather creaking under his weight, and spurred the horse into a gallop. The chase had begun. The moon rode high over the canyon, its pale light spilling across jagged stone. Elias Carter leaned forward in the saddle, eyes fixed on the tracks. Crowley hadn't bothered to hide them. Fresh hoofprints punched deep into the dust, heading north toward the outlaw's hideout. The cold bit at his face, the wind sharp enough to draw tears. He didn't blink them away. Lila's small, terrified face was carved into his mind like a brand. The canyon walls rose higher the deeper he rode, their shadows swallowing the moonlight. The air smelled of sage and dry rock. Somewhere ahead, the echo of hooves bounced between the cliffs close enough to hear, too far to see. Elias slowed his horse. A full charge would only get him killed. Crowley was no fool. He'd set an ambush. He dismounted, tying the reins to a low bush, and advanced on foot. His boots crunched softly in the sand, Winchester cradled tight, a whisper of movement. A spark flint, striking steel. Voices carried faintly. Crowley's camp. They were gathered around a low fire, 4 men, Crowley among them. Lila sat bound on a log, her wrists tied, but her chin high. She spotted Elias instantly, but didn't make a sound. "Boys," Crowley drawled, holding a tin cup of coffee. "What did I tell you?" A man's pride'll bring him right to your doorstep. The rifle barrel of one guard swung toward the shadows where Elias crouched. He fired first. The man jerked back, dead before he hit the ground. Chaos exploded. Elias rolled behind a boulder as bullets tore chips from the stone. The campfire flared, shadows leaping madly. Crowley ducked low, dragging Lila behind an overturned crate. "You ain't leaving here with her," Crowley shouted. "That's the first true thing you've said," Elias growled back. "Because we're both leaving." One outlaw rushed him, a knife flashing in the firelight. Elias met him halfway, slamming the rifle stock into his jaw. Bone crunched. The man went down hard. Another tried flanking him, but Elias spun and fired point blank into the man's chest. The blast lit the canyon walls like lightning. Then it was just Crowley. Crowley yanked Lila upright, pressing his revolver against her temple. "You've got one chance, Carter," Crowley hissed. "Drop the iron and walk." Away. Elias took a slow step forward. His revolver dangled loosely in his right hand, palm open. His left hand slid behind his belt, fingers curling around the hunting knife he kept there. "You think I'm walking away from this?" Elias said quietly. Crowley smirked. "I know you are. Because if you try anything, the girl dies first." Lila's eyes met Elias's. She didn't blink. Elias dropped the revolver into the dirt. The sound of metal on stone rang out sharp. Crowley's smirk widened, just enough. Elias moved. His knife flashed in the firelight, a single upward strike into Crowley's wrist. The outlaw screamed, the revolver tumbling from his grip. Elias shoved Lila aside and drove forward, both men crashing into the dirt. They rolled, fists in boots and teeth in the dust, until Elias found the knife again and pressed it to Crowley's throat. Crowley froze, chest heaving. "Go on," he rasped. "Do it." Elias's breath came heavy. His grip tightened, then loosened. "No," he said, voice low but steady. "You don't get to die easy." He shoved Crowley onto his stomach, bound his wrists with the rope that had held Lila, and dragged him toward the horses. They rode into town at dawn. Elias, Lila, Anna on the wagon. Crowley slumped and bleeding in the back, hands tied, eyes full of hate. The townsfolk gathered quick, word spreading faster than wildfire. Wade Crowley, the man who'd terrorized them for years, tied up like a calf at branding time. Sheriff Boone stepped forward, jaw slack. "Carter, you actually—" "He's all yours," Elias said, cutting him off. Boone nodded, motioning for two deputies to haul Crowley away. Lila stood beside Elias, clutching his hand. Anna, pale but smiling, leaned against the wagon rail. Later that morning, with the sun high and warm, Lila tugged at Elias's sleeve. "You never did eat breakfast," she said. Elias smiled faintly. "What have you got?" She pulled the last hunk of bread from her small satchel, the same loaf she'd tried to buy the day they met. She broke it in half, handing him the bigger piece. He took it, looking at the rough crust and soft middle. It wasn't much, but it was everything. "You keep that spirit," he told her. "It'll carry you farther than any horse." She grinned. "Guess that means you're keeping me around." "Guess it does." The narrator's voice cuts in slow, thoughtful, almost weary. Some folks think the West was won with guns and grit, but more often it was saved by something smaller. A loaf of bread, a stubborn child, a man too tired to fight who decided to stand anyway. Elias Carter didn't plan to be a hero that day. He just wanted to do what was right. But out here, sometimes, that's the same thing. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. The West is full of tales like this one, and each one's got a little truth buried in it.